Albert Einstein wrote Why Socialism in 1949 for the first issue of Monthly Review. He was not speaking as a physicist. He was speaking as a citizen who had watched capitalism produce fascism, world war, and the atomic bomb. He had something to say, and he said it clearly. Einstein opens by answering the question every reader will ask, open quote, is it advisable for one who is not an expert on economic and social issues to express views on the subject of socialism? I believe, for a number of reasons, that it is, end quote. His first reason is philosophical. Science tells us what exists. It does not tell us what should exist. Open quote. Knowledge of what is does not open the door directly to what should be, end quote. The goals of a good society, freedom, dignity, justice, come from outside science. They come from values, and values must be debated by everyone, not just experts. His second reason is psychological. Most people, Einstein argues, live inside an illusion. Open quote, man was, is, and always will be in danger of succumbing to an illusion that the economic forces which shape society can be left to act on their own, end quote. This illusion serves the powerful. If the economy is treated like a natural force, like the weather, then no one is responsible. Nothing can change. Socialism begins by rejecting that illusion. His third reason is political. Economic conditions determine political fate. Open quote. The economic conditions of society are not a matter of indifference to the political fate of the individual. On the contrary, they determine it to a large extent, end quote. For all these reasons, Einstein claims the right to speak, and so do we. Einstein borrows a phrase from the economist Thorstein Veblen. Human society, he says, remains stuck in the predatory phase. Predatory means organized around exploitation, competition, and domination. The strong consume the weak, labor is extracted, resources are hoarded. The engine of this predation is what Einstein calls the economic anarchy of capitalism. Open quote, the economic anarchy of capitalist society as it exists today is, in my opinion, the real source of the evil, end quote. Anarchy does not mean chaos, it means the absence of conscious planning. Under capitalism, production is not organized to meet human needs. It is organized to generate private profit. No one is in charge, and everyone is trapped. This anarchy produces two consequences. First, wealth concentrates into fewer hands. Open quote, private capital tends to become concentrated in few hands, partly because of competition among the capitalists, and partly because technological development and the increasing division of labor encourage the formation of larger units of production at the expense of smaller ones, end quote. Small businesses lose to monopolies, local producers lose to national chains. The class of owners gets smaller, but the class of workers gets larger. Second, this concentrated wealth creates private oligarchies that control the state. Open quote, the capitalist system produces a private oligarchy of immense power whose power is reinforced by the press and the state, end quote. Einstein is not describing a conspiracy, he's describing a structure. The owners of capital do not need to bribe the politicians. They own the newspapers, they fund the campaigns, they shape the laws. The state, far from standing above class conflict, becomes its instrument. Open quote, the private ownership of the means of production, operating under the anarchy of production, results in a situation where the owners of capital are in a position to control the state to a large extent, end quote. Einstein then moves from structure to psychology. What does this system do to the people inside it? First, it produces permanent fear. Open quote, the worker is constantly in fear of losing his job. The worker is also in constant fear of not being able to sell his labor power, end quote. Labor power means your ability to work. Under capitalism, you own nothing except your capacity to labor. You must sell it every day to whoever will buy it. If no one buys it, you do not eat. That fear is not an accident. It is the engine of the capitalist system. But the damage is deeper than the material anxiety. Capitalism cripples the individual. Open quote, the crippling of the individual is a great evil of capitalism. Our whole educational system suffers from this evil. An exaggerated competitive attitude is inoculated into the student, who is trained to worship acquisitive success as a preparation for his future career. End quote. Notice the words crippling, inculcated, worship. Einstein is not describing a neutral economic mechanism. He is describing a system that deforms the human character. It teaches children to see each other as rivals. It turns education into a race. It elevates greed into a virtue. He then states the general law, open quote. The existing economic system has two dreadful effects. It cripples the individual and makes him a slave to the very machines that are meant to free him, end quote. This is the Marxist concept of alienation. The worker does not control the product of their labor. The worker does not control the processes of their labor. The worker becomes an appendage to the machine, a cost to be minimized, a factor of production. Even the capitalist, though, is not free, open quote. The capitalist, driven by competitive pressure, is forced to exploit labor ruthlessly and to expand his capital constantly on pain of ruin, end quote. The system traps everyone. The worker fears unemployment. The capitalist fears bankruptcy. Neither is free. Einstein next addresses the claim that political democracy is enough. He argues that formal democracy, one person, one vote, is not sufficient when economic power is wildly unequal. Open quote. The voter is formally free, but not actually free. He is not in a position to judge the issues properly, and his vote is influenced by propaganda, by the economic pressure brought to bear on him, and by the fear of losing his job. End quote. A homeless person and a billionaire enter the voting booth as equals. They leave the voting booth to face entirely different realities. The media, Einstein notes, is not independent. Open quote. The press, which is for the most part owned by the same private oligarchy, shapes public opinion in its own interest. End quote. And the state, far from being a neutral referee, depends on the capitalist class for tax revenue, investment, and legitimacy. Open quote. The economic power of the private oligarchy is so great that it can resist any attempt by the democratic state to limit its power. End quote. Einstein is not dismissing democracy. He is insisting that democracy cannot survive half a century of extreme inequality. A society that is democratic in form but oligarchic in substance will eventually become oligarchic in form as well. He watched this happen in Germany. Having diagnosed the disease, Einstein prescribes the cure. He defines socialism carefully, distinguishing it from both capitalism and the Soviet bureaucracy he had already criticized. Socialism has three features. First, social ownership of the means of production, organized through democratic planning. Open quote, socialism means a planned economy, which adjusts production to the needs of the community, rather than to the needs of private profit, end quote. Under capitalism, production follows effective demand, the ability to pay. Under socialism, production follows actual human needs, food, housing, healthcare, education, transport. Second, a guarantee of livelihood for everyone, open quote. A planned economy would distribute the work to be done among all those able to work and would guarantee a livelihood to every man, woman, and child, end quote. This is the abolition of the reserve army of the unemployed. No one starves because the market has no use for them. Work is shared. Survival is not a commodity. Third, the preservation and extension of democracy. Open quote. A planned economy may be accompanied by a complete bureaucratic domination of the individual. The preservation of democracy is therefore a necessary condition for socialism, end quote. Einstein is explicit. A planned economy without political freedom is not socialism. It is bureaucratic tyranny. He wants the opposite, an economy controlled from below by the people who live in it. Open quote. Socialism without the democratic participation of the whole population in the management of the economy would be a soulless machine. End quote. Einstein ends with an honest admission. He does not have a complete blueprint. Open quote. The solution of the economic problem of socialism is not a problem of physics or engineering. It is a problem of social organization. End quote. He acknowledges that many practical questions remain unanswered, like how do you set prices? How do you balance central coordination with local initiative? How do you prevent a new managerial class from seizing power? Open quote. I am not able to offer a concrete program for the solution of these problems. That would require a detailed knowledge of the economic and social facts, which I do not possess. End quote. But the absence of a blueprint is not an excuse for inaction. Open quote. The economic foundations of socialist society cannot be laid by decree. They require the active participation of the whole population. End quote. This transformation is not a technical fix. It's a political struggle. It requires ordinary people to organize, to educate themselves, and to demand something better. His essay closes with a statement of purpose. Open quote. The goal of socialism is social and economic justice. It is the overcoming of the predatory phase of human history. End quote. Capitalism is economic anarchy. It concentrates private power. It cripples the individual. It turns formal democracy into a stage show. Socialism is the conscious, democratic planning of production to meet human needs. It is the guarantee of livelihood for every person, and it requires the active participation of the whole population to succeed. Einstein wrote these words in 1949, and they have not aged. Thank you again for 5,000 subscribers. This is the Left Library. Read widely, organize locally. Socialism is not a dream, it's a direction.